to, because that's how family actually gets.
Listen to me. I don't have to. He
Chrissy,
has to. That's your son.
No,
he has to.
You have to remember, once you and him get married, and really, as far as I'm concerned, y'all are married, okay? And if you're part of him, okay, and that means he's definitely me, that means that you're part of me.
The tension was nearly palpable as Chris Lampin and Jim Jones locked eyes, each brimming with barely controlled fury. Voices were raised, and every word seemed to fuel the simmering animosity between them. Friends and family had gathered close by, trading uneasy glances, unsure how to intervene or if they even should. The argument had started over something minor, but it quickly morphed into a heated exchange that was spiraling out of control. Jim, a man notorious for his quick temper, was visibly on edge, his emotions barely held in check. His reputation preceded him, yet Chrissy, unwavering, stood her ground. She wasn't one to cower or submit easily, and everyone in the room knew it. "You can't just talk to me that way," she finally exploded, her voice trembling as she attempted to mask the mix of shock and anger in her tone. The words echoed through the room, revealing the rawness of her frustration. "You've gone too far, Jim." But Jim wasn't one to be outdone. His response was immediate, cold, and clipped. "Don't act like you have any say in how I manage my life or my choices," he fired back, his face twisted in anger. A dangerous glint in his eyes betrayed the tempest of emotions churning beneath the surface. He stepped closer, his towering presence casting a shadow that added an even sharper edge to the standoff. As Jim approached, the air in the room grew heavy with tension. Everyone held their breath, anticipating what might come next. Then, in a flash of motion, he delivered a stinging slap across Chrissy's face. The sound was unmistakable, a sharp crack that reverberated around the room. A stunned silence fell over the crowd, each individual too shocked to react, their expressions frozen in collective horror. Chrissy staggered backward, one hand flying to her cheek as her mind struggled to process what had just happened. Her eyes filled with fury, her voice a mixture of disbelief and resolve as she shouted, "You've completely lost your mind." The outrage in her voice cut through the silence, signaling that she was no longer willing to hold back. Meanwhile, Jim's son, who had been standing on the sidelines, finally decided enough was enough. He stepped forward, his face resolute, and his voice rang out with authority. "Dad, you can't treat her like this. This behavior isn't acceptable." Jim turned to face his son, a dark expression shadowing his face. "Stay out of this." "You don't understand," he snarled. But his son didn't budge, his resolve as unyielding as steel. "No, I'm done staying out of this. I can't stand by while you hurt the people you claim to love. We deserve better than this." His voice was calm but firm, each word carrying a weight that seemed to press down on the room. The gathered friends and family looked on, their shock now replaced by a mix of apprehension and admiration for the young man's courage. Jim scoffed, his disbelief plain on his face. "Better? You think you know better than me? I make the rules here, not you." But his son simply shook his head, his face tinged with disappointment. "This isn't how a family should be. You're pushing everyone away with this attitude." He turned his gaze toward Chrissy, who was still standing tall, despite the physical and emotional blow she had just received. Chrissy took a steadying breath, her voice growing calm yet resolute. "Jim, listen to him. This behavior isn't just hurtful, it's toxic, and I refuse to be a part of it any longer." She straightened, drawing strength from her son's support. Her tone was firm, carrying the weight of her conviction. "We won't let you treat us like this. Not anymore." Jim's son nodded, his expression a mixture of defiance and sadness as he stepped closer, pointing toward the door. "If this is what you think is okay, maybe it's time for you to leave. This isn't the man I looked up to. This isn't the father I thought I knew." A surge of anger flared across Jim's face, his cheeks flushed red with both humiliation and rage. "You think you can just kick me out of my own house?" he growled, his voice low and menacing. But his son stood firm, unwavering. "Yes, I can, if this is how you're going to treat us. If you're not willing to change, then maybe you need some time to think for a moment." It looked as though Jim would lash out again. His body was taut with tension, his fists clenched. But something in his son's words seemed to cut through his rage, forcing him to pause. He looked around the room, taking in the wary faces of the people he had alienated. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut, and for a fleeting moment, vulnerability crossed his face. "Fine," he spat, his voice thick with resentment. "If that's how it is, then I'll go without another word." He turned and stormed out, the sound of the door slamming behind him reverberating through the room. The collective exhale from the remaining crowd was almost audible as the oppressive atmosphere lifted, replaced by a tentative sense of relief. Chrissy and Jim's son exchanged a glance, both of them visibly shaken but resolute. They had taken a stand, one that was long overdue. His son reached out, his face filled with concern. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his gaze flicking to the red mark on her cheek. Chrissy nodded, though her emotions were still raw. I can't believe he did that. It goes beyond the slap, it's everything that led up to this point." Her voice cracked slightly as she spoke, but her determination was clear. "We need to hold our ground. This isn't just about us, it's about what we allow in our lives." Her son nodded in agreement. "It's not just about the slap or the words he threw around. It's about the choices we make for ourselves and our boundaries. We can't let this slide." They both took a deep breath, each finding solace in the other's support. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a turning point. They knew that dealing with Jim's actions would be a long and difficult journey, but they also knew that it was necessary for their well-being and growth. They weren't just protecting themselves, they were taking a stand for a healthier, more respectful family dynamic. Later that evening, as the sun set and cast a warm glow across the room, Chrissy found herself wondering aloud, "Do you think he'll come back?" Her voice was tinged with both hope and apprehension. Her son's response was measured, his expression thoughtful. "I don't know. But we need to be prepared if he does. Ignoring this can't be an option anymore. If he returns, there will have to be real change." As the night deepened, mother and son grew closer, united in their determination to build a safe space for themselves and those they loved. The path ahead was uncertain and fraught with challenges, but they were ready to face it together. They understood that true strength lay not in submission but in standing up for oneself and the people who mattered most. In the coming days, Chrissy and her son continued to support each other, creating a new environment built on respect and resilience. They knew that when or if Jim returned, he would face a family that was no longer willing to tolerate hurtful behavior. There would be new boundaries, and Chrissy was prepared to walk that path with her son by her side. Weeks later, Jim did return. But this time, the dynamic had shifted. The door to the past was closed, but another was left open, one that would allow change if he was willing to take it. The rules were clear, and Chrissy and her son were ready to embrace a future grounded in respect, strength, and mutual understanding.